All right, so get this. We're doing a deep dive. I love these into small places, large issues. Today, we're going to untangle this whole thing about us, like you and me, individuals and societies.
Absolutely. And get ready for some serious aha moments along the way. We're not just talking about societies in some abstract sense. We're going to uncover the invisible forces that shape our daily lives, our choices, even how we see the world.
Invisible forces. Now you got me really curious. I mean, where do we even start with something that big?
Well, the text starts with this idea of society being like an organism. Each part has its own function.
Right, like a heart, lungs.
Exactly. And at first, that kind of makes sense, right? Like a well-oiled machine. Everyone's playing their part.
Yeah, I can see that. But even I know real life is never that neat.
Exactly. The text acknowledges this too. It's where we hit this difference between social structure and social organization. Think of structure like the blueprint of a building. It lays out the rules, the institutions, how things are supposed to work.
Okay, so is social organization what happens when people move into that building and start living?
You got it. Organization is the messy reality, the day-to-day stuff. It's people bending those rules, finding loopholes, improvising. Think about it. Have you ever seen a rule that makes no sense in a situation?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Like, don't walk on the grass, but what if I'm saving a puppy? Rules are made to be adjusted sometimes. That's fascinating, though. So it's not just about the official rules, but how people actually play the game.
Exactly. And the text gives this really interesting example about this. It talks about post-marital residence patterns among the Sami people. Now, traditionally, the wife was expected to move in with the husband's family. But when anthropologists actually looked at what was happening,
It wasn't that simple.
not at all.
Oh.
Only about half the women actually followed that norm. The others made different arrangements depending on their own circumstances. And that right there tells us social life is way more about context, negotiation, than rigid rules.
Okay, that's making me rethink things. It's like we have these ideas of how society works, then bam, reality hits, and it's way more complex.
And this is where the text brings in this idea of scale, understanding how interconnected we are at different levels. We're talking individuals, households, villages, nations, even the entire globe.
Scale, so it's like zooming in and out on a map. We can focus on what's around us or see how everything connects.
Exactly. And get this, even when we think we're acting on our choices can create these ripple effects at different scales. The text uses this example. A small village in Mauritius, Case Noel. Okay, so say you're a fisherman in this village. You're thinking, I'm just trying to make a living.
Putting food on the table, right? Your daily grind.
Exactly. But then think about where you sell your catch. Maybe a local market, right? And then they supply what? Restaurants in a nearby town. That town is part of the tourism industry and so on. And suddenly you're part of this web of connections, way beyond just you.
Wow. When you put it like that, even simple actions can have these huge consequences.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the internet, which really messes with these ideas of scale and connection.
Oh, I bet. I mean, the internet's this ultimate connector, right? It shrinks the world down. But does the text get into that?
It does. It talks about this really cool study, Miller and Slater. They looked at how people in Trinidad use the internet. What they found really challenges this whole online life is separate thing.
Oh, okay, I'm listening.
So for these people, the internet wasn't some escape from their lives. It was woven in. Their relationships, their sense of self, their culture even. It wasn't going online. It was living just through something different.
That's such a good point. Like, for a lot of us, texting IS just talking. It's not this weird new thing.
Exactly. And this was even before smartphones were everywhere. It shows how technology doesn't just shape us, we shape IT,
Yeah.
using our norms and values.
Okay, that's definitely something to think about. But all this interconnectedness, it makes me think, okay, what about control then? If we're all so linked up, who's steering the ship? How do societies even work with all this complexity?
That's the question. And it leads us to this really cool idea from the text, Mary Douglas's grid and group theory. It's about how different societies find a balance. Individual freedom, but also collective order.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Picture two axes. Grid. That's how many rules, regulations a society has, like how much social constraint. Then group, that's how strong the bonds are between people.
So strong grid means lots of rules, expectations, and weak grid is more, I don't know, go with the flow.
Yeah, you got it. Strong group society, they put collectivism first, conformity. Weak group, more individualistic. Douglas said, by seeing where society falls on these axes, we see patterns in how they keep order.
So like examples, what would strong grid, strong group look like? Something traditional. hierarchical.
Exactly. The text actually mentions the Telensi, an ethnic group in Ghana, as an example. Huge emphasis on tradition, roles are clear, lots of social control, everything's structured, not a lot of room to do your own thing.
Okay, that tracks. What about the opposite, though? Weak grid, weak group? Is that even possible?
It's definitely more rare, but the text suggests maybe some hunter-gatherer societies, right? They tend to have more fluid structures, less about material stuff, and decisions are more like everyone agrees.
So let's follow the rules more, adapt to the situation.
Exactly. Now, most societies, they're somewhere in between, of course. And here's the thing. These categories, they're not fixed. Societies change on these axes over time, especially with outside stuff happening.
Outside stuff like what? Colonialism, wars, even the economy changing.
Exactly. Like the text talks about how colonialism messed up a lot of traditional structures, created these tensions between the old ways, the new ways.
That makes me think about how much is changing now, right? Globalization, technology, feels like we're always trying to figure out where we fit in.
And that's the perfect bridge to another part of grid and group. It's not just whole societies, but also the different spaces we're in within those societies. You might have strong grid at work, right, with bosses and expectations, but your friend group is weak grid, way more chill and flexible.
Oh, wow, yeah. Different rules for different spaces. That's
Yeah.
true. Makes you think, though, with all this structure, where did WE fit in? Like, if we're shaped by all this, do we really get to choose anything?
That's where it gets really interesting, and the text brings up Pierre Bourdieu's idea of habitus.
Habitus. Okay. Sounds kind of deep. Like we're all just running on autopilot.
Well, in a way, yeah. Bourdieu's saying our culture, where we come from, it gets inside us, you know? Shapes how we see things, what we like, even our habits, and we don't even realize it.
So not just what we think, but how we move through the world, our habits, what we assume. It's all habitus.
Exactly. Like, think about your taste in music. You like certain stuff, right? But why? Probably your upbringing, your friends, what you were exposed to, like an invisible code guiding us, especially when we're not overthinking it.
Okay, that makes sense. But if it's also influenced by stuff we don't even gain, do we even have free will? Are we just like acting out a script?
$1 million question. I think Bourdieu would say we do have agency, but it's always within the lines of our habitus, those social structures we talked about. Not about being totally free, but knowing the influences so we can choose, you know?
So we get a script, but we can edit it, improvise, maybe even toss it out if we want.
Now you're getting it. And this is key from the text. A lot of how we learn society's rules, it's not taught directly. It's watching, copying those unspoken cues.
Like we teach what we know, but we reproduce who we are. That part in the text about how even in those everyone's equal societies, knowledge, skills, they're not really equal, are they?
Exactly. And that links to power, right? The text talks about how anthropologists now, they get this. Even in small communities, not everyone has the same access to information, to shaping things. Different access to the rule book, you could say.
Right. Good reminder that even when things seem simple, there's always more going on beneath the surface. Makes you appreciate what anthropologists do, uncovering that stuff.
Absolutely. It brings us back to this whole individual and society dance, right?
Yeah.
Not one controlling the other, but this constant give and take, influencing, changing.
We covered so much.
Yeah.
Structures we don't see, cultural stuff we inherit, quite a deep dive. But hey, listener, here's something to think about. If our social world is always being rebuilt by what we do, can we choose to redesign it?
Now that is the question. Because by understanding all this, these forces, we're not just along for the ride. We can shape the world around us. And that, my friend, is powerful stuff.